Is the establishment deliberately pretending to be stupid? A few days ago, an Islamic terror attack at a synagogue in Manchester in England left 3 people dead. Here's the attacker, Mr Jihad al-Shamie, a Syrian Muslim who claimed asylum in Britain as a child. The police and the BBC said, well, we can't be sure of the attacker's motive. I mean, yeah, he's a Muslim who drove a car into a synagogue and then jumped out and stabbed people while screaming Allah Akbar. He was wearing a fake bomb vest and his name is Mr Jihad. Yeah, it's a real head scratcher, this one. Well, it was for some people. If you listen to mainstream media like the BBC and Emily Maitlis, you'd think the problem was that an evil far-right gammon had done a Brexit. Neville the Sky Sports pundit and centrist dad somehow managed to jitsu the issue around to blaming the attack on people putting up British flags.
Seeing the news last night and the news this morning dominated by the horrific attacks within the Jewish community just about a mile from here. And was driving home from Salford City last night. I was driving actually to Salford City, going down a Littleton Road, seeing 60, probably 50 or 60 Union Jack flags. And on the way back I went down the parallel road, which is Bury New Road, which has got the Jewish community right at its heart, and they're out on the streets, defiant, not hiding or in fear. And I just kept thinking as I was driving home last night that we're all being turned on each other, and the division that's being created is absolutely disgusting. Mainly created by angry, middle-aged white men who know exactly what they're doing. Funnily enough, on one of my development sites last week, there was a Union Jack flag put up, and I took it down instantly. Brexit has had a devastating impact on this country, and the messaging is getting dangerous, extremely dangerous. All these idiots that are out there spreading hate speech in any form and abuse in any form, we must stop promoting them. We must stop elevating our voices towards them. It needs to stop now.
He was accused of virtue signalling for this, but it's not just virtue signalling. Gary Neville is awash in Muslim money. He was a paid pundit for Qatari state TV during the World Cup, and his Manchester St Michael's luxury flats project is dependent on UAE investors. Who knows what other Gulf money is funneled through his secretive, relentless investment vehicle? The BBC tiptoed around it. Listen to how they describe the threat to the Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, the Jewish community has felt vulnerable since before the October the 7th attacks 2 years ago. They did feel that there was a rising tension, and it was coming from 2 directions. It was coming from people who had a political mindset linked to what was going on in the Middle East, but also from the far right, which hasn't completely gone away in terms of the Jewish community. Some of the neo-Nazi groups that we've investigated over the years have clearly still had a deeply anti-Semitic mindset and a violently anti-Semitic mindset as well. But clearly, Israel's response to what happened on October the 7th and what's happened in Gaza has hugely raised the temperature on issues around the Jewish community.
This was right after it happened. Man, the guy can't wait to pivot away to talking about how the real threat is the far right. And he also talks about
people who had a political mindset linked to what was going on in the Middle East.
Do you mean Muslims, mate? He can't say Muslims, obviously, because then someone at the BBC would call him Islamophobic. So instead he uses the clunkiest euphemism I've ever heard. People with a political mindset linked to what's going on in the Middle East. And of course he blames Israel at the end, because this is the BBC. According to former BBC stars on the News Agents podcast, who were recording right as the event was unfolding, the real tragedy is that it will be exploited by the far right.
Very sadly, there are many people in our profession, and sadly in journalism, on the right, I have to say, and probably on the left as well, who will try to use this and are already using it to divide. So what's going to happen over the next 24 hours, I'm afraid, is when we see a lot of the press and some broadcast media, not the BBC, obviously, not LBC, we're going to see people really exploiting the situation, if I'm really honest.
So trying to raise the temperature rather than
trying to
take
raise
it
the temperature.
I mean, some people would say that the real tragedy is the people actually killed in the attack, but no, apparently the real tragedy is that it gives ammunition to evil far-right bigots who want to stop Islamists carrying out their traditional cultural practices of their homelands. Yeah, the real problem is people who want to stop things like this happening again, instead of burying their heads in the sand and pretending that diversity is a strength. Because yes, I am one of the people that the BBC and Emily Maitlis would describe as far-right. I have far-right opinions, such as the radical idea that a man called Mr Jihad shouldn't get British citizenship. Who's rubber stamping that application? If you rock up from Syria and your name is Mr Explodey Al-Qaeda like to kill, or Mr Islamic Holy War ISIS stabby stabby, then no, you don't get to live in Britain. I'm sorry. But I thought that as horrible as this tragedy is, it would at least be a wake-up call for our cosseted elites who insist that diversity is a strength and mass immigration is wonderful. I mean, surely this has to be the catalyst to confront Islamism. Surely when the attacker is called Mr Jihad, our leaders can't pivot away and blame the far right or brush this under the carpet, getting everyone to sing "Don't Look Back" in anger. No, the media rallied to remind us that Muslims are the victims.
It once again highlights the vulnerabilities of those who have faith, of different faith groups. Terror came to the door of the Jewish community today. We know also that the Muslim community can be targeted in these kind of incidents as well.
They're trying to frame this as if it was just a general attack on faith, but it wasn't. It was someone from a very specific faith following a clear pattern of violence against people from another specific faith. And Sky also told us that diversity is a strength as they stood over the bodies killed by diversity.
Another man told me, which I've heard from a few people around here actually, that this area is a very tolerant area. It's a multicultural area. It's a place where Jewish people and Muslim community, there are large communities of both of those faiths in the area, have lived side by side for years, and they're understood to be very tolerant of one another, and he just could not believe that something like this would happen, and let alone here in a community where there are multiple different faiths living here in peace and tolerance.
Yeah, the two communities are very tolerant of each other, with only the occasional mass stabbing. It's fascinating to watch the establishment strenuously feign ignorance lest their bankrupt diversity equals strength worldview completely crumbles around them. It's like watching a bankrupt country expend the last of its foreign reserves to prop up its worthless currency. I insist that the diversity lira is a valid and stable currency, huffs Presidente Emily Maitlis as her throne is carried away for firewood. It wasn't the far right who exploited the situation. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood jumped on the situation to use it to make it illegal for British people to protest against migrant hotels full of imported Muslims that are dumped in their communities.
The strengthening of the legislation that I'm going to bring about is based on the ability of the police to place conditions and restrictions on protests. And what I will be making explicit is that cumulative disruption, that is to say the frequency of particular protests in particular places, is in and of itself a reason for the police to be able to restrict and place conditions.
Ms Mahmood also said,
"What I do want to say is to those who seek to divide us, they will fail."
But we are divided. What does Miss Mahmood think that multiculturalism means? We belong to different cultures with different values. Some cultures have a history of slaughtering other cultures. The right recognise that and wish to protect themselves from the hellish experiment in multiculturalism. The left are still convinced that the experiment will work and will persecute rightists for their lack of faith. Jihadi Lord Farquaad is playing a dangerous game here. People protest migrant hotels because their wishes are ignored. If the protests are banned, then the government is pushing them to direct action and property damage. If the government doesn't listen to people and take the radical approach of doing what people actually want, then they're encouraging sectarian violence and anti-establishment violence. I took this picture of Miss Mahmood when I walked too close to her nest and she swooped down to protect her eggs. Former Scottish leader Humza Yousaf said it had nothing to do with Islam, it was just one deranged extremist. It's funny how Jews were systematically killed and expelled from so many Muslim countries: Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Syria, Morocco, Egypt, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia by just one deranged extremist after another, with no overarching connection, no link to Islam whatsoever. This wasn't a random isolated attack. You don't need me to tell you this, but there's a bit of a problem with anti-Semitism on the left and in the Muslim community. Look at this guy's dad. He didn't just name his kid Jihad, he also praised the October 7th terror attacks in Israel when hundreds of Jews were slaughtered. His dad's an NHS doctor, by the way. If you're Jewish, you might just want to arrange private healthcare than leave your lives in the hands of NHS staff who celebrate when your blood is spilled. On the day of the Manchester synagogue attack, Muslims and leftists took to the streets in Britain for anti-Israel protests that looked a lot like a celebration of the attack. We've seen swastikas waved at these protests and calls for jihad. We've seen leftists try and justify Islamic violence by saying resistance is justified when under occupation and globalise the intifada. Well, the intifada is globalised, all right. It's in Manchester now, although I suppose we should remember the advice the British police gave when people screamed for jihad on the streets of London. They said, the word jihad has a number of meanings. Yes, it can mean a personal struggle for improvement. Yeah, maybe the people screaming for jihad on the streets of London are just calling for people to do sit-ups on a road to self-improvement. Imagine for a moment that we'd seen a similar attack by a far-right extremist. Do you think people would be saying, not all Nazis, this is just a random extremist. We must protect the far-right indoctrination facility where he was radicalised. My heart goes out to the far-right community who are experiencing a horrific backlash. When have you ever heard somebody from the mainstream media say that not everyone at the Tommy Robinson rally is a bigot, and the media stressed that this guy, Mr Jihad, is a British citizen in the same way that they said that Axel Rudacabana is a Welsh choir boy? It's absolutely duplicitous, feigned ignorance. Although for anyone who thinks that Islamists don't integrate into British life, look, he's turned his keffiyeh into a woolly hat to keep his head warm. Also, I've got to give a special mention to how incredibly British this whole tragedy was. Watching the video, police were shouting, "Get back!" and nobody was paying any attention whatsoever. People were walking past as if it's perfectly normal, ignoring a victim lying on the ground. People were shouting, "Fucking shoot him, he's got a bomb!" And then the police opened fire and shot 2 innocent bystanders. Wow, it's lucky those police officers spent so much time in diversity training. Oh, and police were apparently tipped off about Mr Jihad by his neighbours who were concerned that he was radicalising their kids. But the police didn't do anything because they were scared about looking racist and they were very busy arresting middle-aged white women for tweets. With this level of competence, maybe the police were being genuine when they said they didn't know what the motive was. Maybe they were genuinely sitting with a crayon and a piece of paper trying to work it out. Why did Islamic terrorists in Britain always have fake bomb vests, by the way? Just bottles wrapped in foil. Is it a comfort thing? Like those cargo cult islanders who built fake planes to try and summon the goodies that American troops left? I guess it's pretty hard to make a real bomb, so if you're the offspring of generations of cousin marriage, you're going to have an easier time making a Blue Peter Project pretend bomb out of fairy liquid bottles and double-sided sticky tape. And while this was going on, what's the biggest threat to the nation according to the BBC? Well, apparently the police have some officers who think that Islam is a problem. The BBC ran a 7-month undercover operation using your licence fee money. They got a policeman drunk, they coaxed and prodded him until he said something they thought was problematic based on his own experiences.
Who do you reckon the worst one is then? Like, worst to deal with, like people coming over?
Ooh. So I've had quite a lot of Arabs.
Oh wow, this policeman and his reality-based opinions are truly horrific and put everything into perspective. Listen, we don't have to live like this, and maybe soon we'll see a change in the government that stops pandering to Islamists and sorts this problem out. I can't see this government staying in much longer. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy turned up to a vigil and was booed.
Therefore, I have great pleasure in introducing our Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, and before I do, please, we know how we all feel. We know how we all feel.
Go to Palestine! Shame on you! Shame on you! Go to Palestine! Leave us alone!
They've allowed it to run on a Brexit. My children's school was closed today. You have allowed this to happen.
You have blood on your hands!
David Lammy.
Friends, we must stand together today.
Do you know how loathed you have to be to get booed by British Jews, the most polite people in Britain? Jews aren't safe in Britain, whether it's from the far left or the Islamists imported by the far left to do their dirty work for them. At some point, we will have to face the fact that mass immigration has brought foreign tribal conflict to Britain. Multiculturalism always leads to sectarian conflict. Look at Syria, Lebanon, the Balkans. Diversity hasn't been a strength in any of these places. Britain had a stable, harmonious society for centuries because we had a homogenous population on an island bound by commonalities, not diversity. Nobody actually thinks diversity will work in Britain either. The left want mass immigration because migrants tend to vote for them, and the hard left want mass immigration to break down the nation state so that they can implement a communist utopia, and neoliberals want mass immigration for cheap labour to make a bit of money this week. We can continue lying to ourselves that diversity will work out, but the reality is that terror attacks will be commonplace. In their vulnerable moments, our children will be predated upon by men who have no respect for our laws and no affinity for our tribe, and democracy will break down as people vote along sectarian lines. The invisible fabric of our society that supports our ideals, our freedoms and our prosperity will crumble. The trust between strangers that greases the cogs of society will erode. Walls will go up. We'll soon see why tribal societies fail, why Norway succeeds while Somalia doesn't. The likely outcome for Britain is something like the Balkans, with separate states inside this island for the separate tribes colonising it. The worst outcome is something like Lebanon, with violent Islamists fomenting civil war and destroying our economic and social fabric and then seizing power. It's not all doom and gloom though. You may live to sit in a stadium and watch Queers for Palestine experience Palestine for Queers. You may yet see Carol Vorderman and Jess Phillips publicly flogged for incorrect positioning of their burqa, and they'll both still strenuously feign ignorance that Islam has anything to do with it. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you want to support me making these videos and get exclusive content, you can sign up to my Patreon. There's a link below. There's a podcast on there with Aideen McQueen talking about Irish nationalism on there right now. Also, if you want to see me do stand-up live, I'm doing a bunch of shows, including a show in Southampton on November 26th, so come down and see that. It's just me for like 2 hours. Okay, thanks for listening. I've been Leo Kears. Bye. Bye-bye.